Arab millionaire buys humble woman to have a child, but fate prepares a surprise. Thrilling. Hi, my beloved story family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Happy 2025 to all the story lovers out there. May this year bring you captivating tales, inspiring characters, and unforgettable adventures. Keep reading and dreaming. Today, I want to share something from my heart. Lately, I've been feeling a little unsure, wondering if my stories still touch you the way they used to. When my last video had fewer comments, it made me question if I'm doing enough to inspire and connect with you. Every story I share comes from a place of love and passion, and your feedback means the world to me. If my stories have brought you joy, please write yes in the comments. And if there's anything I can improve, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You are my family, and your support keeps me going. Thank you for being here. It means everything. Now let's begin today's story. The emergency alert echoed through the pediatric wing of Wyoming Medical Center, its urgent tone piercing the pre-dawn quiet. Abigail Cora's tennis shoes squeaked against the freshly waxed linoleum as she sprinted toward room 412, her scrubs pocket heavy with supplies. The autumn wind howled outside, rattling the windows of Casper's largest hospital like nature itself was trying to break in. Multiple seizures. Temperature 104.2, called out Dr. Martinez as Abigail burst through the door. 6-year-old Tommy Wright thrashed on the bed, his small body rigid, while his mother stood pressed against the wall, hands clasped in prayer. Abigail moved with practiced precision, her auburn hair escaping its tight bun as she worked alongside the medical team. Years of experience had taught her that panic was a luxury pediatric nurses couldn't afford. Every movement mattered, every second counted. "Come on, buddy," she whispered, helping to administer the anti-seizure medication. "Stay with us." The monitors screamed their warnings into the tense air, but Abigail remained focused. She'd lost children before, each one carved permanently into her heart, but she refused to lose Tommy. Not today, not on her watch. Minutes stretched like hours until finally, mercifully, the seizures subsided. Tommy's rigid body relaxed, his breathing steadied, and the terrible alarms fell silent. Abigail checked his vitals one more time before allowing herself to exhale. "Your son is stable now, Mrs. Wright," Dr. Martinez assured the trembling mother. "Nurse Cora will stay with him while I adjust his treatment plan." Abigail pulled up a chair beside Tommy's bed, her legs shaky with leftover adrenaline. At 28, she'd been a pediatric nurse for 6 years, and moments like these still rattled her to her core. She reached for Tommy's small hand, noting how his fever had already begun to drop. "Guardian angel," Mrs. Wright whispered, approaching the bed. "That's what Tommy calls you." Abigail smiled, though her heart ached. "He's the brave one. I'm just here to help." The sun was rising over the vast Wyoming plains by the time Abigail left Tommy's room, casting long shadows through the hospital corridors. She stopped at the nurse's station to update his charts, her handwriting notably steadier than her nerves. "Rough morning?" asked Sarah, the charge nurse, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. "Nothing we couldn't handle," Abigail replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The rich aroma helped ground her, pulling her mind back from the edge of exhaustion. "Though I wouldn't mind a quiet—" The elevator doors chimed open, cutting off her words. A group of suits emerged, hospital administrators and board members, surrounding a figure that seemed oddly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. He wore a pristine white thobe that touched the floor, its elegant simplicity making the businessman's suits look garish in comparison. A distinctive black and white keffiyeh draped over his head, framing sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite his relatively young age. "Sheikh Abdul Ati," Sarah whispered, straightening her uniform. "The Saudi investor who's been funding children's hospitals across Asia and Europe. Word is, he's looking to expand into the American market." Abigail watched as the group approached the nurse's station, noting how the Sheikh's gaze wandered to the children's artwork decorating the walls. There was something in his expression, not the practiced interest of a wealthy donor, but genuine curiosity. "Your facility is impressive." Sheikh Abdul addressed the administrators, his English perfect, but softened by an accent that made each word sound like poetry. "However, I am more interested in seeing how you care for the children themselves." The hospital's CEO cleared his throat. "Of course, Your Excellency. We can arrange a formal tour." A child's laughter interrupted him, clear and bright as morning bells. Down the hall, 8-year-old Lucy Chen sat in her wheelchair, wearing her signature princess crown as she worked on her latest masterpiece. The Sheikh's attention immediately shifted, his entire demeanor changing. "May I?" He gestured toward Lucy, already moving in her direction before anyone could respond. Abigail watched as Sheikh Abdul approached the young girl, his formal bearing melting away. He crouched beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to Lucy's eye level. "Assalamu alaikum, little princess," he said warmly. "What are you creating?" Lucy, who rarely spoke to strangers since her accident, looked up from her drawing. Something in the Sheikh's gentle presence must have put her at ease, because she smiled, a real smile, not the brave face she usually showed the world. "It's a magical garden," she explained, holding up her artwork. "See? The flowers are made of stardust, and the butterflies carry dreams in their wings." "Mashallah," Sheikh Abdul breathed, studying the drawing with genuine interest. "Truly, you have captured magic on paper. In my culture, we believe that children are blessed with the ability to see wonders that adults have forgotten." Lucy's eyes widened. "Really? In your culture, do princesses ride flying carpets?" The Sheikh laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill the entire corridor. "Some do, yes, though I suspect you would prefer your trusty chariot here." He tapped the arm of her wheelchair. "It seems far more reliable than a carpet that might be blown off course by the wind." Abigail felt something shift in her chest as she watched their interaction. In her years of nursing, she'd seen countless wealthy donors tour the hospital, their compassion carefully measured and performative. But Sheikh Abdul's connection with Lucy was authentic, his interest genuine. He spent several minutes discussing Lucy's artwork, asking questions about her magical garden and sharing stories about the real gardens in his homeland. The administrators shuffled uncomfortably, clearly anxious to continue their formal tour, but the Sheikh paid them no mind. Finally, Lucy's art therapist arrived for their scheduled session. Sheikh Abdul rose gracefully, placing his hand over his heart in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for sharing your magic with me, Princess Lucy," he said solemnly. "May Allah bless you with many more beautiful dreams to capture." As he turned back toward the waiting group, his eyes met Abigail's. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something electric passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding about what truly mattered in life. The spell broke as the CEO stepped forward, eager to regain control of the tour. "Your Excellency, if you'll follow me, I can show you our new cardiac unit." "Actually," Sheikh Abdul interrupted smoothly, "I would prefer to learn more about your pediatric care programs." His gaze returned to Abigail. "Perhaps one of your nurses could provide a more authentic perspective." Before Abigail could process what was happening, Sarah nudged her forward. "Nurse Cora is one of our most experienced pediatric nurses," she offered. "She's been with us for 6 years and has helped implement several innovative care protocols." Sheikh Abdul's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, not quite a smile, but something equally warm. "Excellent. Nurse Cora, would you be kind enough to show me how you care for Allah's most precious gifts?" Abigail felt the weight of every administrator's stare, but it was the genuine interest in the Sheikh's expression that made her straighten her shoulders. Of course, Your Excellency. Though I should warn you, my tour might be slightly less formal than what you're used to. Perfect, he replied. And this time he did smile, a brief flash of white teeth that transformed his entire face. In my experience, the most valuable insights often come from unexpected sources. As Abigail led Sheikh Abdul down the corridor, away from the cluster of suits and titles, she couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous had just occurred. Like the first drop of rain before a desert storm or the initial tremor before an earthquake. A small change that promised to reshape the landscape of her entire world. Behind them, she could hear the administrator's muffled protests, but Sheikh Abdul seemed unconcerned. His attention was focused entirely on the children they passed, his questions thoughtful and specific. When they reached Tommy's room, Abigail hesitated. "This is one of our more serious cases," she explained. "Tommy had multiple seizures this morning due to complications from his treatment." Sheikh Abdul's expression grew solemn. "May we look in on him?" Sometimes the most important moments in life happen in rooms like these. Abigail nodded, pushing open the door quietly. Tommy was awake now, tired but stable, while his mother dozed in the chair beside him. Sheikh Abdul observed the scene in silence, taking in the medical equipment, the worried lines on Mrs. Wright's face, and the resilient spirit in Tommy's eyes. "Your dedication to these children," he said softly, once they had stepped back into the hallway. "It shows in every detail. The way you arrange their rooms, how you speak to them, the small touches that make this place feel less frightening." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In my religion, we believe that those who care for children hold a special place in Allah's heart." "I believe children hold a special place in every heart," Abigail replied, surprised by her own boldness. "They remind us of what matters most." Sheikh Abdul studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, they do." The rest of the tour passed in a blur of introductions and explanations, but Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her universe. It wasn't just the Sheikh's presence, commanding though it was, or the way he listened so intently to every word she spoke. It was the sense that she had stumbled upon someone who saw the world as she did, through the eyes of the children they sought to protect. As their tour concluded back at the nurses' station, Sheikh Abdul turned to address the waiting administrators. "Your facility has great potential," he announced, "but more importantly, it has great heart. I look forward to discussing how we might work together to expand that potential." The CEO practically glowed with relief, but Sheikh Abdul wasn't finished. "I would also like to arrange regular visits to better understand your day-to-day operations." His eyes found Abigail's once more. "With your permission, Nurse Cora, I would value your continued insights into the practical aspects of pediatric care." Abigail felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but managed to maintain her professional composure. "Of course, Your Excellency. I'm happy to help in any way I can." As the group departed, Sarah nudged Abigail's ribs. "Well, that was unexpected. Though I have to admit, he's not what I imagined a Saudi sheikh would be like." "No," Abigail agreed, watching his white-clad figure disappear into the elevator. "He's not like anyone I've ever met." The autumn wind continued to howl outside, but within the hospital walls, something new had taken root, a seed of possibility that would grow to change not just Abigail's life, but the lives of countless children across two very different worlds. She just didn't know it yet. As she turned back to her duties, Abigail caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. The same nurse she'd always been, with her messy bun and coffee-stained scrubs, and yet somehow everything felt different. Like the universe had shifted ever so slightly on its axis, setting her on a path she never could have imagined. Tommy's monitors beeped steadily down the hall. Lucy's laughter echoed from the art therapy room, and somewhere in the distance, a new story was beginning to unfold, one that would bridge cultures, challenge expectations, and prove that love, in all its forms, knows no boundaries. But for now, Abigail simply straightened her scrubs, checked her supply pocket, and prepared for whatever the rest of her shift might bring. After all, in a pediatric ward, there was always another child who needed her care, another small battle to be fought, another miracle to witness, and perhaps, just perhaps, a few more unexpected visitors who might change everything. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Proposal. The following weeks brought autumn's full glory to Casper, painting the Wyoming landscape in brilliant golds and crimsons. But inside Wyoming Medical Center's pediatric wing, Abigail noticed different changes taking place. The most obvious was Sheikh Abdul Ati's continued presence, his visits becoming so regular that even the children had stopped staring at his traditional dress. "Nurse Angel!" Tommy called out one morning as Abigail checked his vitals. His seizures had finally stabilized, and his infectious smile had returned. "Is the story man coming today?" The story man was their name for Sheikh Abdul, who had taken to visiting during lunch breaks, entertaining the children with tales from his homeland, stories of desert jinn, magical oases, and flying carpets that made even the most worried parents smile. "I'm not sure, buddy," Abigail replied, though she knew perfectly well that Abdul, as he'd asked her to call him in private, never missed a Wednesday visit. "Let's check your temperature first." The door opened quietly, and Abdul's commanding presence filled the room, though he'd adopted a softer demeanor around the children. Today he carried something wrapped in elegant silk. "Assalamu alaikum, young warrior," he greeted Tommy, his dark eyes warm. "I brought you something from my last trip." Tommy's face lit up as Abdul carefully unwrapped the silk, revealing an intricately carved wooden box. "This," Abdul explained, "is a puzzle box that belonged to my grandfather. Legend says it was crafted by a clever jinn who loved riddles." Abigail watched as Abdul demonstrated how different panels shifted and slid, his strong hands moving with surprising gentleness. Tommy's eyes grew wide with wonder, his medical challenges momentarily forgotten in the magic of the moment. "The best medicines," Abdul said softly as they left Tommy's room later, "cannot always be measured in milligrams or administered through IVs." "Hope is pretty powerful medicine," Abigail agreed, leading him toward the nurse's station where she needed to update Tommy's charts. "Indeed." Abdul paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Would you join me for tea this afternoon, Nurse Cora? There is something I would like to discuss." Abigail felt her heart skip, a reaction she immediately tried to suppress. Over the past weeks, she'd found herself increasingly drawn to this complex man who could command a boardroom in one moment and sit cross-legged telling stories to sick children the next. But she'd reminded herself repeatedly that their worlds were too different, the distance between them too vast. "Of course," she replied professionally. "The cafe on the third floor has decent tea." Abdul's lips curved slightly. "Actually, I had something more traditional in mind. My driver can take us to a proper tea house if you're willing to venture off hospital grounds." That's how Abigail found herself 3 hours later, seated on plush cushions in a private room of Casper's only Middle Eastern tea house. The space was intimate but not inappropriate, with latticed screens providing privacy while remaining partially visible to the main room. Abdul poured the tea himself, the aromatic steam rising between them like unspoken questions. His movements were precise, practiced, yet there was an underlying tension in his shoulders that Abigail had never seen before. "First," he began, setting down the ornate teapot, "I must thank you for your patience these past weeks. Your insights into pediatric care have been invaluable. The children love your visits, Abigail replied, wondering where this was leading. "You've brought so much joy to the ward. Joy is a powerful healer." Abdul took a sip of his tea, his expression thoughtful. "In my culture, we believe that Allah sends us signs, opportunities that we must be wise enough to recognize and brave enough to grasp." He set down his cup, meeting her eyes directly. "I have a proposal for you, Nurse Cora. One that may seem unusual, but I ask that you hear it completely before responding." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest, but she managed to nod calmly. "As you may know, I have been establishing children's hospitals throughout the Middle East and Asia," he continued. "My newest project is in Dubai, a state-of-the-art facility that will serve children from across the region. What you may not know is that this project is deeply personal for me." He paused, and for the first time, Abigail saw vulnerability in his expression. "My sister lost her daughter to a treatable condition because the nearest children's hospital was too far away. I vowed then to ensure no other family would face such tragedy. But buildings and equipment are not enough. A truly healing environment requires the right people, those with both skill and heart." Abdul leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "I have watched you work, Nurse Cora. I have seen your dedication, your intuition, your ability to bring comfort to both children and parents in their darkest moments. These qualities are rare and precious." "You're offering me a job?" Abigail asked, trying to process his words. "I am offering you a partnership," he corrected. "Not just a position at the hospital, though that would be part of it. I am also seeking—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "A mother figure for my future child." Abigail nearly dropped her teacup. "I'm sorry, what?" Abdul held up a hand, requesting patience. "Please let me explain fully. I am required by my position and culture to produce an heir. However, I have no desire for a traditional marriage arrangement. What I seek is a partner in the truest sense, someone who shares my vision for helping children, who can bridge Eastern and Western medical practices, and who would be willing to help me raise a child through surrogacy." The tea house seemed to spin around Abigail as Abdul continued, outlining a proposal that was both shocking and strangely logical. He spoke of separate living quarters, but shared responsibilities, of cultural education and medical innovation, of creating a new model for pediatric care while building an unconventional family. "You would have your own wing in my home," he explained, "complete autonomy in your personal life, and a significant role in both the hospital and our child's upbringing. I know this is unconventional, but—" "Unconventional," Abigail interrupted with a slightly hysterical laugh. "Sheikh Abdul, this is beyond unconventional. It's an opportunity," he finished quietly, "one that could change countless lives, including our own." Abigail took a deep breath, forcing herself to think professionally. "The hospital position, would I have real authority to implement changes?" "Complete authority over pediatric care protocols," he confirmed. "I have seen your innovations here. Imagine what you could do with unlimited resources. And the child? You're talking about surrogacy, not adoption." Abdul nodded. "Yes, the child would be biologically mine, carried by a surrogate mother. You would be involved from the beginning, helping to make medical decisions throughout the pregnancy and taking on a maternal role after birth." "But not as your wife," Abigail clarified. "No," he agreed. "Though you would have all the privileges and respect of that position, our relationship would be a partnership based on mutual goals and shared responsibility. I believe such arrangements can be more honest, more equitable than traditional marriages." Abigail stared into her tea, watching the leaves swirl in patterns that seemed as complex as her thoughts. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," Abdul's voice was gentle. "I do not expect an immediate answer. Take time to consider, to ask questions, Visit Dubai, see the hospital, meet my family, make an informed decision. Your family, they would accept this arrangement. A slight smile touched Abdul's lips. My sisters already admire you from my reports of your work. They are progressive women who value competence over convention. As for the rest of my family, they trust my judgment in business matters, and this they would see as a business arrangement, a mutually beneficial partnership. Is that all it would be? The question slipped out before Abigail could stop it. Abdul's expression softened. I have grown to respect you deeply, Nurse Cora. Perhaps in time that respect could grow into something more. But I offer this proposal based on what we already share, a commitment to healing children and a vision for bridging cultures. He reached into his robe and withdrew an envelope. Here are the details of the position, including compensation and responsibilities. Take time to review them, ask any questions, consider the possibilities. Abigail accepted the envelope with slightly trembling hands. And if I say no, then you will have my gratitude for considering the proposal and my continued respect as a medical professional. Abdul's voice was sincere. This must be your choice, made freely and fully informed. The call to prayer sounded from somewhere nearby, its haunting melody filtering through the tea house's ornate windows. Abdul rose smoothly, adjusting his keffiyeh. I must go, he said, but know this. Whatever your decision, you have already changed how I see the world. Your dedication to those children, your ability to bring light to dark places. These are gifts that transcend culture and convention. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart skip. Consider well, Nurse Cora, sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with steps we never imagined taking. After he left, Abigail sat for a long time in the empty tea house, the envelope heavy in her hands, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never dreamed of. Outside, the Wyoming wind continued its eternal dance across the plains, but for the first time in her life, Abigail wondered if it might be carrying her toward distant shores and unknown horizons. The envelope seemed to pulse with potential, not just for her career or for the children she could help, but for a life that defied easy categorization. A partnership that challenged both Western and Eastern conventions while honoring the essence of both. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah at the hospital. Tommy's asking for another story, says only the storyman's tales make the medicine taste better. Abigail smiled, touching the screen gently. In that simple message lay perhaps the truest measure of Abdul's character, not his wealth or position, but the way he brought magic into children's lives when they needed it most. The tea house owner appeared silently, refilling her cup with a knowing smile. Signs come to those who are ready to see them, she said in accented English. The question is, are we brave enough to follow where they lead? Abigail wrapped her hands around the warm cup, breathing in the aromatic steam. Somewhere between Wyoming and Dubai, between convention and innovation, between what was and what could be, lay a decision that would change not just her life, but countless others. The autumn sun slanted through the latticed windows, casting intricate patterns across the envelope in her hands. Each shadow seemed to hold a possibility, each ray of light a question. And somewhere in her heart, Abigail felt the first stirrings of an answer she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Chapter 3. Decision of a Lifetime. The envelope sat untouched on Abigail's kitchen counter for 3 days, its presence commanding attention like a visitor who refused to leave. Each morning she'd make her coffee, the steam curling around the crisp edges of Abdul's proposal, and each morning she'd tell herself today was the day she'd open it. On the 4th morning, her mother's voice crackled through the phone, full of small-town wisdom and big-time worry. Honey, you're not actually considering this, are you? Moving halfway across the world for some arrangement that's not even a real marriage? Abigail stirred honey into her tea. She'd switched from coffee, though she wasn't ready to admit why, and watched Wyoming's first snow of the season dust her windowsill. "It's complicated, Mom. Complicated is dating a divorced man with kids. This is a plot from one of those romance novels you pretend not to read." "Mom!" "I'm just saying, sweetie, there are plenty of nice doctors right there in Casper. Dr. Peterson's son just moved back to town, and he's—" "I have to go," Abigail interrupted, catching sight of the time. "Early rounds." The hospital corridors felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Every corner held memories of Abdul's visits, the way he'd kneel to speak with children in wheelchairs, how he remembered every patient's name and story, the gentle way he'd correct pronunciation when teaching them Arabic words. "Earth to Nurse Cora." Sarah waved a hand in front of her face. "You've been staring at Tommy's chart for 5 minutes. He's been discharged, remember?" Abigail blinked, realizing she'd been lost in thoughts of Tommy's joy when he'd finally solved Abdul's puzzle box. The victory dance he'd done, 4 tubes and all, while Abdul clapped and praised his cleverness. "Sorry, just tired." She tucked the chart away, but Sarah wasn't letting her off that easily. Tired of trying to decide whether to accept the offer of a lifetime. Her friend's voice dropped to a whisper. "The whole floor's buzzing about it. A state-of-the-art hospital, unlimited resources, a gorgeous Sheikh." "It's not about that," Abigail protested, though her cheeks warmed. "It's about making a difference, about helping children who wouldn't otherwise have access to modern medical care." "Uh-huh." Sarah's knowing smile was infuriating. "And the fact that he looks like a GQ model in those robes has nothing to do with it." Before Abigail could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Abdul. "May I stop by the pediatric ward this afternoon? There is someone I would like you to meet." Her heart did that annoying skip thing again as she typed back a professional acknowledgement. Sarah peered over her shoulder and whistled low. "Girl, you've got it bad." "I've got work to do," Abigail corrected, but her mind was already racing ahead to the afternoon. Abdul arrived precisely at 2, accompanied by a woman whose elegant abaya couldn't hide her very pregnant state. "Nurse Cora, may I present my sister, Dr. Amira Ati. She oversees our women's health initiatives in Dubai." "Please," the woman smiled, her English perfect and warm. "Call me Amira. My brother has told me so much about you." They settled in the hospital's garden courtyard, a small oasis of green, protected from Wyoming's bitter wind. Amira's dark eyes, so like her brother's, studied Abigail with intelligent interest. "Abdul tells me you have questions about our proposal," she began directly. "About how it would work, practically speaking. About cultural expectations and family dynamics." Abigail glanced at Abdul, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll leave you two to talk freely," he said, rising smoothly. "Amira knows my heart in this matter, and she will answer with complete honesty." Once he'd gone, Amira leaned forward. "So ask me anything, woman to woman, doctor to nurse, east to west. No diplomatic filters, no cultural niceties." The questions tumbled out then, all the concerns Abigail had been turning over in her mind. Would his family really accept this arrangement? Would the child face social stigma? Would I always be seen as an outsider? Amira listened carefully, her hands resting on her rounded belly. "You know why I became a doctor?" she asked finally. "Because when our niece died, I realized that all our family's wealth and influence meant nothing without proper medical care. Abdul and I both made vows that day, his to build hospitals, mine to ensure women had access to modern health care." She shifted, finding a more comfortable position. "Our family understands dedication to a cause. They respect competence and commitment. The arrangement Abdul proposes? Yes, it's unconventional, but so is everything else he does. He builds hospitals that combine Western medicine with Eastern healing traditions. He challenges cultural norms while respecting their essence. But a child, Abigail began, will be loved, Amira finished firmly, by a father who defies conventions to ensure their welfare, by a mother figure who crossed oceans to help others, and by a family that values actions over appearances. She smiled. Besides, my children need cousins to spoil. I'm not Muslim, Abigail pointed out. I don't speak Arabic, Neither did my husband when I met him, Amira interrupted with a laugh. He was a British doctor volunteering in Dubai. Now he speaks better Arabic than some natives, and he's more conservative about some traditions than I am. Her expression grew serious. The question isn't whether you fit perfectly into our world, Abigail. It's whether you're willing to help create a new one, a bridge between cultures, between medical traditions, between different ways of seeing family and commitment. Abigail twisted her hands in her lap. And Abdul? What kind of man is he really, beyond the hospitals and the charity work? Amira's smile turned fond. My brother is complicated, brilliant in business but sometimes clueless about emotions, fiercely protective of family but terrified of traditional marriage after watching our parents' loveless arrangement. He works too hard, takes too much responsibility on his shoulders, and has an unfortunate addiction to American action movies. They both laughed at that, the tension breaking slightly. But, Amira continued, he is also the man who sat by my hospital bed for 3 days when I lost my first pregnancy, who builds playgrounds in refugee camps because he believes every child deserves to laugh, who drives our conservative family crazy by insisting that capability matters more than gender or nationality. She reached across the table, taking Abigail's hand. I cannot tell you what to choose, but I can tell you this. My brother does nothing halfway. If he offers you partnership, it is because he truly believes in your potential to help change lives. If he offers you co-parenthood, it is because he sees in you the qualities he wants his child to learn. The garden's fountain bubbled quietly, its sound nearly lost beneath the Wyoming wind. Abigail thought of all the children she'd helped here, all the ones she couldn't help because of limited resources or outdated protocols. The hospital in Dubai, she said slowly. Tell me more about its programs. Amira's eyes lit up, and for the next hour they discussed medical initiatives, cultural integration programs, and innovative treatment approaches. The more Amira explained, the more Abigail could see the potential, not just for providing care, but for creating a new model that could be replicated across regions. As the afternoon light began to fade, Amira struggled to her feet, waving away Abigail's offered help with a smile. You know, she said, adjusting her abaya, when I married my British doctor, everyone said it wouldn't work. Too many differences, too many obstacles. But love, respect, shared purpose, these things transcend culture. She touched her belly meaningfully. And sometimes the most beautiful things grow from unexpected combinations. That evening, Abigail finally opened the envelope. The proposal was comprehensive, detailed, respectful of both her professional autonomy and personal boundaries. But it was a small, handwritten note at the bottom that caught her eye. I offer not certainty, but possibility. Not a traditional path, but a chance to forge a new one. The choice must be yours, made with clear eyes and an open heart. Abdul. She stayed up late into the night, making lists, researching Dubai, reading everything she could about cross-cultural medical practices. Her mother called twice more, each time with a new local bachelor to recommend. But when dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, Abigail was still at her kitchen table, the proposal spread before her, her heart racing with equal parts terror and excitement. She picked up her phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Sarah answered on the first ring, despite the early hour. "Well?" Abigail took a deep breath, watching the sunrise paint her familiar world in new colors. "I need you to help me learn Arabic." Her friend's squeal of excitement was cut short by another incoming call, Abdul's number lighting up her screen. For a moment, Abigail stared at it, thinking of desert winds and hospital corridors, of puzzle boxes and possibility, of bridges waiting to be built between worlds she was only beginning to understand. Then, with hands that trembled only slightly, she answered the call that would change everything. "Yes," she said simply, before he could speak. "Yes to all of it." The silence that followed was brief but profound, filled with the weight of decisions made and paths chosen. Then Abdul's voice, warm and certain. "Alhamdulillah, welcome to the beginning of our journey. Nurse Cora." Outside, the Wyoming wind sang across the plains, carrying with it the promise of desert sands and distant shores, of challenges unmet and stories yet to be written. Abigail wrapped her hands around her cooling tea, its aromatic steam rising like incense toward a future she could barely imagine, but suddenly couldn't wait to explore. In her pocket, the envelope crinkled, no longer a burden of indecision, but a map to a new world. A world where convention bowed to compassion, where barriers became bridges, and where the biggest risks sometimes led to the greatest rewards. She had 1,000 questions, 1,000,000 fears, and exactly one certainty: nothing in her life would ever be the same again. And somehow, watching the sunrise paint the sky in colors that could have graced any desert morning, that seemed exactly right. Chapter 4. New Horizons. Dubai materialized from the desert haze like a city from a dream, its towers piercing clouds that had never known Wyoming snow. Abigail pressed her face to the private jet's window, her heart thundering with equal parts excitement and terror. Below, the Persian Gulf sparkled like scattered sapphires, a sight so different from the endless prairie she'd left behind that it hardly seemed real. First time seeing Dubai? The question came from Fatima, Abdul's youngest sister, who had accompanied her on the flight. Where Amira was all business and sharp intellect, Fatima radiated warmth and mischief. "It's—" Abigail searched for words that wouldn't sound hopelessly provincial. "Overwhelming?" Fatima suggested with a knowing smile. "Wait until you see it from the ground. Though I should warn you, Abdul's been practically rebuilding the entire east wing of the house for you. He's determined to make sure you feel at home." The mention of Abdul sent a familiar flutter through Abigail's chest. They'd spent the past month coordinating her transition via video calls and messages, each interaction carefully professional, yet underlaid with something that made her pulse quicken. The landing was smooth as silk, the private terminal a study in elegant efficiency. Abigail clutched her carry-on, the rest of her life packed into boxes that would follow later, and stepped into Arabian heat for the first time. "Ahlan wa sahlan," a familiar voice called out. Abdul stood waiting, impeccable in his traditional dress despite the temperature. Something in his eyes softened when they met hers, though his greeting remained formal. "Welcome to Dubai, Nurse Cora." "Please," she found herself saying, "I think we're past Nurse Cora now." His smile was brief but brilliant. "Indeed we are. Abigail." The drive from the airport was a journey through contrasts. Ultra-modern architecture rising from ancient sands, luxury cars sharing roads with occasional camels, tradition and innovation dancing an intricate ballet. Abdul pointed out landmarks, his deep voice painting pictures of the city's history and future. "And there," he indicated a massive construction site, "is our hospital. The children's wing will be ready within months." Abigail leaned forward, professional excitement momentarily overriding everything else. The facility was enormous, its design both futuristic and somehow organic, with sweeping lines that mimicked desert dunes. Those curves aren't just aesthetic, Abdul explained, noting her interest. They're designed to maximize natural light while minimizing heat absorption. The entire building will use 40% less energy than conventional hospitals. The solar panels. Only part of it. We're also implementing a groundwater cooling system, and he caught himself with a laugh. Perhaps we should save the technical details for tomorrow. Today is for helping you settle in. The car turned through massive gates into a property that made Abigail's breath catch. Abdul's house was more like a private palace, its architecture a stunning blend of traditional Islamic design and modern elegance. This way, Fatima linked arms with her, steering her toward a separate entrance. Let me show you your wing while Abdul deals with some business calls. The wing was larger than any house Abigail had ever lived in. Her private quarters included a massive bedroom suite, a study filled with medical texts in multiple languages, and a balcony overlooking gardens that somehow thrived in the desert heat. The staff have been practicing their English, Fatima chatted as they toured. Though Abdul mentioned you're learning Arabic? Trying to, Abigail admitted. It's challenging. But worth it. A new voice joined them. Amira, Abdul's other sister, her pregnancy now in its final months. The household is buzzing with excitement to have you here, especially the medical staff. Your reputation precedes you. Abigail blinked. My reputation? Your innovations in pediatric care protocols? The paper you published on integrating family support systems? Abdul made. Sure, everyone knew about your accomplishments. Amira's smile was knowing. He's very thorough in his research. Before Abigail could process that, a soft knock announced Abdul's return. He'd changed from his formal attire into a simpler thobe, the kind he wore during hospital visits in Wyoming. If you're not too tired, he said, I thought you might like to see the hospital plans in detail. The contractors have some questions about the pediatric wing layout. Work. Yes. That was safe, familiar territory. Of course. His study was a surprise, warm woods and rich textiles softening the formal space. One wall held traditional Arabic calligraphy, another displayed child's artwork that she recognized from their Wyoming patients. You kept them, she said softly, touching one of Tommy's drawings. Of course. Abdul spread blueprints across his desk. They remind me of where this journey began. They lost themselves in hospital plans, their heads bent close over technical specifications. Abdul's expertise in hospital administration complemented her practical medical knowledge perfectly. Hours slipped by as they debated room layouts and equipment placement, their previous formality melting into comfortable collaboration. You see, he said at one point, their hands brushing as they both reached for the same document. This is why I knew this partnership would work. We balance each other. The word partnership hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Abdul's phone buzzed, another contractor question, and the moment passed. That evening, after a family dinner that felt surprisingly relaxed despite its opulence, Abigail stood on her balcony watching the sun set over Dubai. The call to prayer echoed across the city, hauntingly beautiful in the gathering dusk. A soft knock drew her attention. Abdul stood in the doorway, holding a package. A welcome gift, he explained, crossing to join her. Though perhaps welcome back would be more accurate. Inside the package was a wooden puzzle box, identical to the one he'd given Tommy in Wyoming. It belonged to my grandmother, Abdul said quietly. The original one. I gave Tommy a replica. His fingers brushed hers as he demonstrated how to open it. She used to say that life's greatest puzzles often contain the most precious answers. The box clicked open, revealing a small key. For your private library, Abdul explained. I had it built adjacent to the hospital. A place where you can research, innovate, implement your ideas without bureaucratic obstacles. He paused, choosing his words carefully. A place where you can begin building bridges between Western and Eastern medical traditions. Abigail turned the key over in her hands, feeling the weight of trust it represented. "Thank you. Thank you," he countered softly, "for taking this leap of faith, for seeing the potential in this partnership." Again, that word, carrying layers of meaning neither of them was ready to explore. Later that night, after Abdul had gone, Abigail sat cross-legged on her new bed, surrounded by the few personal items she'd brought in her carry-on. Her phone showed dozens of messages from Sarah and her mother, but she wasn't ready to respond yet. Instead, she opened the puzzle box again, studying its intricate patterns. Like this whole situation, it seemed simple at first glance, but revealed more complexity the longer she looked. A text from Abdul lit up her phone. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we begin changing lives." Simple words, yet they sent warmth spreading through her chest. She typed back, "Tomorrow," then added, remembering her Arabic lessons, "Inshallah." His response came quickly, "Mashallah. You're learning." Abigail smiled, running her fingers over the puzzle box's smooth wood. Yes, she was learning. About medicine, about culture, about partnership in all its forms. And perhaps most surprisingly, about how the heart could feel at home in places it had never been before. The Dubai night sparkled beyond her windows, a tapestry of lights that rivaled the desert stars. Somewhere in this glittering city was a hospital waiting to be filled with hope and healing. Somewhere in this vast house was a man whose vision had brought her halfway across the world. And somewhere between Wyoming and Dubai, between Western and Eastern, between professional and personal, a new story was taking shape. A story that, like the puzzle box in her hands, was proving far more intricate and beautiful than she'd ever imagined. Chapter 5. Understanding Hearts. 3 months into her life in Dubai, Abigail discovered that adaptation happened in layers, like the strata of coloured sand in the bottles local artisans sold. The outer layer was easy, learning to navigate the gleaming city, adjusting to the rhythm of calls to prayer, even growing accustomed to the constant presence of household staff. Beneath that lay professional adaptation, implementing her pediatric care protocols, coordinating with international medical teams, watching the hospital rise from the desert sand like a modern miracle. But the deepest layer, the one that kept her awake during the velvet darkness of Arabian nights, was understanding Abdul. She saw him daily now, their lives intersecting in ways both planned and unexpected. During formal meetings, he was Sheikh Abdul Ati, commanding respect with quiet authority as they reviewed hospital progress. But there were other moments, shared cups of tea on her balcony, quiet discussions in his study, chance encounters in the garden at dawn, when he was simply Abdul, a man whose complexity continued to surprise her. "You're doing it again," Fatima teased one morning over breakfast. Abdul's youngest sister had become Abigail's unofficial cultural translator. "That little furrow between your eyebrows when you're trying to figure him out." "I don't," Abigail began, but Amira cut in from where she rested on a nearby divan, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. "Save your denials, Habibti," Amira said, using the term of endearment that had become natural between them. "We've watched you both dancing around each other for months. The staff is taking bets on who will break first." Heat crept up Abigail's neck. "It's not like that. We have an arrangement." "An arrangement," Fatima rolled her eyes, "that had my logical, practical brother installing a rose garden outside your window because you mentioned once that you missed Wyoming's flowers." Before Abigail could respond, Abdul's voice came from the doorway. "Are you corrupting my hospital administrator with gossip, little sister?" He wore reading glasses, Abigail noticed, and carried a stack of papers that suggested he'd been up late working again. Lately, she'd taken to leaving cups of mint tea outside his study during these late sessions. They never spoke of it, but the cups always returned empty. "Not gossip," Fatima protested. "Cultural education." "Did you know Abigail's never been to a traditional souk?" Abdul's eyebrows rose. "An oversight we should correct, perhaps." He hesitated, then continued more formally. "Would you be interested in seeing the old city this evening? There are some medical herb shops I think you'd find fascinating." "I'd like that," Abigail said softly, trying to ignore Fatima's knowing smile. The workday passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. The hospital was taking shape faster than expected, its innovative design drawing international attention. Abigail's pediatric care protocols, blending Western medicine with traditional healing practices, had already attracted inquiries from hospitals across the region. Evening found her changing clothes 3 times before settling on a modest but elegant abaya that Amira had helped her choose. The deep blue silk made her feel both respectful of local customs and undeniably feminine. Abdul waited in the courtyard, having switched his business clothes for more casual traditional dress. Something shifted in his expression when he saw her, a momentary softening that made her heart skip. "The blue suits you," he said quietly, then added something in Arabic that made the nearby gardener smile. The drive to Old Dubai was comfortable, filled with the easy conversation they'd developed over months of collaboration. Abdul told stories about growing up in the area, pointing out places where modern buildings now stood over ancient foundations. The souk was a feast for the senses. Aromatic spices, glittering textiles, calls of vendors mixing with traditional music. Abdul stayed close, his hand occasionally ghosting near her elbow to guide her through crowded passages. Each touch, though brief, felt charged with unspoken awareness. "Here," he said finally, drawing her into a tiny shop fragrant with herbs. The elderly proprietor greeted Abdul warmly in Arabic, then studied Abigail with wise eyes. "Ah," the old man switched to English. "You are the one building the new hospital, the one who understands that healing comes in many forms." "Word travels fast," Abigail observed, "in Dubai, faster than the desert wind." The man began pulling out various herbs, explaining their traditional uses. His knowledge was fascinating, a blend of ancient wisdom and practical application that aligned perfectly with Abigail's integrated care approach. She was so engrossed that she almost missed the way Abdul watched her, not just with his usual professional interest, but with something deeper, more personal. When she asked an intelligent question about combining traditional remedies with modern treatments, his smile held unmistakable pride. Later, laden with carefully wrapped purchases, they walked through a quieter section of the souk. String lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars, and the evening air carried the scent of jasmine and cardamom. "Thank you for this," Abigail said softly. "It helps, seeing where all these traditions began." Abdul nodded. "Understanding comes in layers here. Like the desert itself, what appears simple on the surface holds countless stories beneath." He paused, then added, "You've adapted remarkably well. Better than I dared hope when I proposed this arrangement." There was that word again, arrangement. Lately, it had started to feel insufficient for whatever was growing between them. "Abdul," she began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the same uncertainty, the same awareness that their carefully structured partnership had begun to shift into something else entirely. A call to prayer echoed through the narrow streets, its haunting beauty a reminder of where they were, who they were, all the complexities they still had to navigate. "Come," Abdul said gently. "There's one more place I want to show you." He led her to a small cafe tucked away from tourist paths. The walls were lined with books in various languages, and soft oud music played in the background. As they settled at a corner table, Abdul ordered in Arabic, then turned to her with unusual hesitation. "I have something to confess," he said, reaching into his robe to withdraw a small book. "Do you know what this is?" Abigail recognized the leather binding. "Your poetry collection." He looked surprised. "How did you—" "Fatima mentioned it. She said you never show anyone." Abdul's fingers traced the book's worn cover. "My mother encouraged my poetry when I was young. She said some things can only be expressed in verse." He opened to a marked page. "I've been writing again these past months. Would you like to hear why?" Abigail's heart thundered as he began to read in Arabic, then translated, "In the space between worlds, where dawn meets dusk, I find myself learning new words for feelings I thought I knew, like how desert rain changes not just the land, but the heart that witnesses it." His voice faded, leaving the words hanging between them like a question neither was ready to ask. "It's beautiful," Abigail whispered, understanding dawning. "When did you write it?" "The night you arrived." Abdul closed the book carefully. "I've written more since then. Each time I see you with the hospital staff, every time you solve a problem I hadn't even noticed, when you leave tea outside my study door." He trailed off as their order arrived, traditional Arabic coffee and a plate of delicate sweets. The interruption gave them both a moment to collect themselves, to acknowledge the weight of what was being said and left unsaid. "This arrangement," Abdul finally continued, choosing his words with careful precision, "it's become something I never expected, something I'm not sure I have the right words for in any language." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Then perhaps we need new words." The smile that crossed his face then was unlike any she'd seen before, open, vulnerable, full of possibility. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with deliberate intent. "Indeed," he said softly, "perhaps we do." They stayed in the cafe until closing, talking about everything and nothing. Hospital plans mixed with childhood memories, professional goals intertwined with personal dreams. When they finally emerged, the souk had grown quiet, but the night air hummed with unspoken promise. The drive home was silent, but charged with new awareness. At her wing's entrance, Abdul paused. "Abigail," he said, her name like poetry in his accent. "Would you join me for dinner tomorrow? Not to discuss the hospital or our arrangement, but simply dinner." Her heart soared, even as her mind raced through implications, complications, possibilities. But looking into his eyes, seeing the same mix of hope and uncertainty she felt, Abigail knew there was only one answer. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." His smile illuminated the darkness. "Then sleep well, Habibti," he said softly, using the endearment for the first time. "Tomorrow we begin writing a new chapter." Later, in her room, Abigail found a folded paper slipped beneath her door. Inside was a single verse in Abdul's elegant handwriting. "Some arrangements, like desert flowers, bloom into unexpected beauty. Allah's greatest gifts often come disguised as simple beginnings." She pressed the paper to her heart, feeling the future reshape itself into something neither of them had planned, but both, perhaps, had secretly hoped for all along. Chapter 6. Unexpected Complications. The first signs of trouble came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Abigail sat in the fertility clinic's sterile waiting room, her hand clasped tightly in Abdul's as they awaited news about their surrogate's latest test results. The past week had been a whirlwind of quiet dinners, shared poetry, and cautious steps toward something deeper than their original arrangement. But now, watching the doctor's face as she entered the consultation room, Abigail felt their carefully constructed world begin to tremor. "I'm sorry," Dr. Rashid began, her expression compassionate but professional. "The embryo transfer was unsuccessful. There are some complications we need to discuss." Abdul's grip on Abigail's hand tightened imperceptibly. His voice, when he spoke, remained steady, but Abigail had learned to read the subtle tensions in his jawline. "What kind of complications?" The doctor spread several charts across her desk, explaining in medical terminology that boiled down to a devastating truth. Their chosen surrogate had developed conditions that made future attempts risky. They would need to start the process over with someone new. "These things happen, Doctor," Rashid assured them. "It's not uncommon to face setbacks in surrogacy journeys. We can begin screening new candidates immediately." But Abigail knew it wasn't that simple. She'd seen the politics involved in their first surrogate selection, the careful balancing of medical criteria, cultural considerations, and family expectations. Abdul's position meant everything they did was scrutinized, discussed, debated. The drive home was silent, heavy with shared disappointment. Abdul's fingers drummed against the steering wheel, a rare display of agitation from a man who usually maintained perfect composure. "We should tell the family together," he finally said as they pulled into the compound. "They will have opinions about the next steps." Abigail nodded, understanding the layers of meaning in his words. In the months she'd lived here, she'd learned that family opinions carried weight far beyond mere suggestions. Especially now that their relationship was shifting into something more personal, every decision would be analyzed through multiple cultural lenses. They found Amira in the garden, her own pregnancy now in its final weeks. She took one look at their faces and understood. "Oh, Habibti," she opened her arms to Abigail. "Come, both of you. Let's have tea before we face the storm." The storm arrived sooner than expected. By evening, Abdul's extended family had gathered in the formal majlis, their concern manifesting in a barrage of suggestions and thinly veiled criticisms. "Perhaps this is a sign," Abdul's Aunt Karima observed, her traditional abaya rustling as she gestured emphatically. "A traditional marriage would be more blessed." "The hospital project is taking too much of your focus," another relative chimed in. "These modern arrangements, mixing business with family matters." Abdul sat at the head of the gathering, his expression neutral but his shoulders increasingly tense. Abigail watched him from her position among the women, wishing she could ease his burden somehow. "Enough," Amira finally interrupted, her pregnancy giving her special status to speak boldly. "This is a medical matter, not a referendum on their choices. The Prophet himself, peace be upon him, sought the best medical care available in his time." The debate continued in rapid Arabic that Abigail could only partially follow, but the underlying currents were clear. Their unconventional arrangement was being questioned, and the failed surrogacy attempt was being seen as divine commentary. Later that night, unable to sleep, Abigail found herself wandering to her private balcony. The Dubai skyline glittered against the desert darkness, a view that had become comforting in its familiarity. She heard soft footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Abdul. "I thought I might find you here," he said quietly, joining her at the railing. He'd changed from his formal clothes into the simpler thobe he wore in private, and his feet were bare against the marble floor. These unguarded moments had become precious to them both. "I'm sorry," they both said simultaneously, then shared a small laugh that helped break the tension. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Abdul said firmly. "The family's reaction, they mean well, but they don't understand what we're building here." "And what exactly are we building, Abdul?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, heavy with all the uncertainty of their evolving relationship. He turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Something I never expected," he admitted. "When I proposed this arrangement, I thought I had everything planned perfectly. A partnership based on shared goals, mutual respect, careful boundaries." He smiled ruefully. "Allah must have found that amusing. Because nothing has gone according to plan. Because everything that matters most was never part of the plan at all." He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the cool night air. "The way you've transformed our hospital project, how you've won over even the most conservative staff members, your dedication to understanding our culture while helping us embrace new ideas." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And most unexpectedly, how you've transformed my understanding of what's possible." Abigail felt tears threatening. Even with today's setback, especially with today's setback. Abdul's free hand came up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "Because today I realized something important. When Dr. Rashid gave us the news, my first thought wasn't about the family's reaction or the project delays. It was about how much I wanted to comfort you, to share this difficulty with you, not just as a partner in an arrangement, but as—" He trailed off, but his eyes said everything his words couldn't yet express. The call to evening prayer floated across the city, its haunting beauty a reminder of where they were, who they were, all the complexities they still had to navigate. But standing there in the starlight, Abigail felt something shifting, like desert sands rearranging themselves into new patterns. "We'll find another surrogate," she said softly. "One the family approves of, one who meets all the medical criteria." "Yes," Abdul agreed, "but first there's something more important we need to discuss." He took a deep breath. "These past weeks, since that night at the poetry cafe, I've been thinking about how to honor both tradition and truth, about how to bridge the gap between what my position demands and what my heart desires." Abigail's pulse quickened. "Abdul, let me finish, Habibti, before my courage fails." His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "I know this isn't how either of us planned things. I know there will be challenges, cultural, familial, personal. But I find myself no longer content with our careful arrangement, not when every day shows me new depths to your spirit, new reasons to—" A knock at the door interrupted him. Fatima burst in, slightly breathless. "Sorry to interrupt, but Amira's water just broke. The baby's coming early." The next hours were a blur of activity. Despite being weeks premature, Amira's daughter arrived healthy and strong, her first cries echoing through the private hospital wing, just as dawn painted the desert sky in shades of rose and gold. Abigail found Abdul in the hospital's prayer room later, his forehead pressed to his prayer mat in gratitude. She waited quietly until he finished, then handed him a cup of the mint tea that had become their private ritual. "She's beautiful," Abigail said softly. "Amira's asking for you." Abdul took the tea, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. "Come with me?" "As family." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Abigail nodded, understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them, catalyzed by the day's mix of loss and joy. In Amira's private room, they found the new mother glowing with happiness despite her exhaustion. She took one look at them standing together and smiled knowingly. "About time," she murmured, cradling her daughter. "Some things are written in the stars, even if we take scenic routes to reach them." Abdul's hand found Abigail's again, their fingers intertwining naturally. Outside, the Dubai morning burst into full brilliance, promising another day of challenges and possibilities, of bridges to be built and boundaries to be reimagined. They still had so much to figure out: the surrogacy journey, family expectations, cultural integration. But standing there, watching new life bring fresh hope, Abigail felt the last walls of their careful arrangement beginning to crumble, making way for something far more precious and profound. The baby gurgled softly, and Abdul squeezed Abigail's hand. "We'll find our way," he whispered in Arabic, then translated for her benefit. "Together, inshallah." "Together," Abigail agreed, letting herself lean slightly against his strength. Inshallah. Chapter 7. Desert Bloom. The desert held secrets that only patience could reveal. Abigail learned this truth one dawn in late summer when Abdul took her to witness a rare miracle, the blooming of desert roses after an unexpected rainfall. They stood together in the cool morning air, watching delicate pink petals unfurl against harsh sand, defying every expectation of what could flourish in such an unforgiving place. "My mother used to say that love is like these flowers," Abdul said softly, his shoulder brushing hers as they crouched to examine the blooms. "It appears when least expected and thrives where we think nothing can grow." 2 weeks had passed since Amira's daughter's birth. 2 weeks of unfinished conversations and meaningful glances, of moments charged with possibility but interrupted by the demands of hospital openings and family obligations. The failed surrogacy attempt had sparked endless family discussions, but it had also crystallized something between them that could no longer be ignored. "The hospital opening is next week," Abigail reminded him, though they both knew the schedule by heart. Their shared project had grown into something remarkable, a fusion of cutting-edge medicine and traditional healing practices that was already drawing international attention. "Yes," Abdul agreed, then hesitated before adding, "But first, there's somewhere else I'd like us to go, a place that might help us understand our path forward." That's how Abigail found herself boarding a private helicopter later that morning, flying over endless dunes toward a destination Abdul wouldn't reveal. He'd asked her to pack for overnight, his eyes holding secrets she was eager to discover. They landed near a remote village that seemed to rise from the sand like a mirage. Children ran to greet them, their excitement suggesting Abdul was a frequent visitor. But it was the small medical clinic that caught Abigail's attention, modern equipment visible through windows framed by traditional architecture. "Welcome to Al Hayat village," Abdul said, helping her down from the helicopter. "This is where it all began." As they toured the clinic, Abdul shared its story. This was where his niece had died years ago, too far from proper medical care. But instead of remaining a place of tragedy, he had transformed it into a hub of hope, a pilot project that proved modern medicine could be successfully integrated with traditional practices. The villagers were skeptical at first, he explained, as they watched an elderly traditional healer work alongside a young doctor. They feared losing their cultural identity, their traditional wisdom. But look now. Abigail observed in amazement as ancient herbal remedies were prescribed alongside modern medications, as prayer rooms adjoined recovery wards, as science and tradition danced in perfect harmony. Everything she and Abdul had been working to achieve in their Dubai hospital was already happening here, on a smaller scale. "This is incredible," she breathed, watching a group of women receive prenatal care that blended the best of both worlds. "Why didn't you tell me about this place before?" Abdul's expression softened. "Because I needed you to form your own vision first, to develop your ideas without being influenced by what we'd already tried here. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to be sure, before bringing you to a place that means so much to me." Sure of what? Instead of answering directly, he led her to meet Khalil, the village's elderly midwife, whose weathered face held both wisdom and mischief. The old woman took one look at them and broke into a knowing smile. "Ah," she said in Arabic, "finally you bring her. I was wondering how long it would take you to realize what Allah had gifted you." They spent the afternoon with the village women, learning their stories, understanding how they'd bridged tradition and progress. As the sun began to set, Abdul led Abigail to a simple but elegant tent set up on a dune overlooking the village. Traditional rugs and cushions created a comfortable seating area, while lanterns waited to illuminate the gathering darkness. The hospitality team outdid themselves, Abigail observed, noting the elaborate dinner setup. Actually, Abdul admitted, looking slightly embarrassed, I arranged this myself. Some things, some conversations, should be private. They sat together as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Abdul poured Arabic coffee with the same grace he showed in everything, but Abigail could sense an underlying tension in his movements. When I first proposed our arrangement, he began finally, I thought I had everything figured out. A logical solution to multiple challenges. The hospital's need for your expertise, my family's expectations about an heir, your desire to expand your impact on children's health care. He set down his coffee cup carefully. I had spreadsheets, briefing documents, contingency plans, everything except... Except what? Except a plan for falling in love with you. The words hung in the desert air, as delicate and unexpected as the morning's roses. Abigail's heart thundered in her chest as Abdul continued, his voice gaining strength. I've watched you these past months, Habibti. Watched you learn our language, respect our traditions, while gently challenging outdated practices. Seen you win over skeptical staff members and conservative family elders alike. Observed how you blend compassion with competence, strength with sensitivity. He reached for her hand. But most of all, I've watched myself change, grow, discover aspects of life I never knew I was missing. Abdul, Abigail began, but he shook his head gently. Please let me finish. When the surrogacy failed, I realized something crucial. My first thought wasn't about the project delays or family expectations. It was about you, about wanting to comfort you, protect you, share both joy and sorrow with you, not as a business partner, but as... He took a deep breath. As the woman I've come to love. The lanterns flickered too, life automatically as darkness fell, casting intimate shadows across his features. In the distance, the village's evening prayers began, their haunting beauty a reminder of the world they would have to navigate. I know this complicates everything, he continued. The hospital project, the surrogacy plans, family expectations. But I find myself no longer able to maintain our careful pretense of mere partnership. Not when every day brings new reasons to love you, new evidence that what began as an arrangement has grown into something far more precious. Abigail felt tears threatening. And your family? The cultural differences? All the reasons we initially agreed to keep things professional? Abdul's thumb traced patterns on her palm. Look around you, he gestured to the village below. This place proves that tradition and progress can coexist, that apparent opposites can create something more beautiful together than either could achieve alone. He smiled softly, like desert roses blooming after rain. When did you know? She whispered, her free hand reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. 1,000 little moments, he admitted. When you left tea outside my study door. When you sat for hours with Amira during her labor, switching between English and Arabic as needed. When you solved that crisis with the pediatric wing design by suggesting we incorporate traditional healing gardens. His eyes crinkled. But mostly, I knew every time you looked at me like you're looking at me now. The desert night had fallen completely now. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. From the village came the sounds of evening life, children's laughter, women's conversations, the peaceful rhythm of a community in harmony with itself. I love you too, Abigail said simply, the words feeling both monumental and completely natural. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid. Of what, Habibti? Of complicating the hospital project, of disappointing your family, of not being enough for your world. Abdul's response was to pull her closer, his forehead resting against hers in an intimate gesture that said more than words could express. "You are not a complication," he whispered. "You are a completion. Everything else, the hospital, the family expectations, the cultural integration, will figure out together." A shooting star streaked across the desert sky, and Abigail was reminded of another conversation under different stars back in Wyoming when this journey began. How far they'd come from careful arrangements and professional boundaries. "So, what happens now?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Abdul smiled, reaching into his robe to withdraw a small box that made her breath catch. "Now, if you're willing, we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement. We acknowledge what Allah has blessed us with and move forward together, not just as partners in a project, but as partners in life." He opened the box to reveal a ring that perfectly bridged their two worlds. Traditional Arabic calligraphy entwined with modern design, diamonds catching the lantern light like stars brought down to earth. "Abigail Cora," he said formally, though his voice shook slightly, "will you marry me? Not for arrangement's sake, not for the hospital project, but because love, like desert roses, blooms where Allah wills it." The desert held its breath, or perhaps that was just Abigail's heart pausing between beats. In that moment, she saw their future unfold, challenges and joys, bridges to build and barriers to break, a life of blending worlds and creating something new and beautiful from the combination. "Yes," she whispered, then again louder, "Yes." As Abdul slipped the ring onto her finger, the village erupted in celebration, drums and ululations revealing that their private moment had quite an audience. Khalil's delighted laughter carried up the dune, along with what sounded like the entire village's approval. "You planned this," Abigail accused, laughing through happy tears. "I planned many things," Abdul admitted, drawing her close. "But loving you? That was Allah's plan all along." They stayed under the desert stars until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, their hopes for the hospital, plans for a wedding that would honor both their traditions, dreams of the family they would build together. When the sun rose, painting the dunes in shades of rose and gold, it illuminated not just two people, but a new kind of love story, one that, like the desert roses, proved that the most beautiful blooms often come in unexpected places. Chapter 8. Cultural Bridges. News of their engagement spread through Dubai's social circles like a desert windstorm, kicking up reactions that ranged from enthusiastic support to carefully veiled concern. The hospital's grand opening provided a perfect backdrop for the announcement, though Abigail quickly learned that being Sheikh Abdul Ati's fiancée added new layers of complexity to her role as hospital administrator. "The board of directors wishes to discuss the reporting structure," Abdul mentioned one evening, finding Abigail in their newly shared garden. She'd created a space that blended Wyoming wildflowers with desert blooms, a living metaphor for their relationship. "They're concerned about the appearance of nepotism." Abigail looked up from her Arabic medical textbook, noting the tension in his shoulders. "They want to change my position? They suggested it." A smile played at his lips. "I reminded them that your qualifications existed before our engagement, and that losing you would mean losing half our international partnerships." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. The ring on her finger caught the setting sun, its Arabic inscription, "Two hearts, one path," gleaming like a promise. "It's not just the board, is it?" she asked softly. Abdul sighed, settling beside her on the cushioned bench. "My Aunt Karima is organizing a series of cultural integration sessions. She feels that as the future wife of a sheikh, you should be thoroughly versed in our traditions." That actually sounds helpful, Abigail said diplomatically, though they both knew Aunt Karima's sessions would be more like trials by fire. The first session began the next morning, a crash course in traditional Arabic etiquette that made medical school seem simple. Karima, resplendent in an intricately embroidered abaya, watched like a hawk as Abigail practiced everything from proper tea service to formal greeting protocols. The wife of a sheikh, Karima instructed, must be an example to others. Your every movement will be scrutinized, especially as a Western woman. Abigail's hands shook slightly as she attempted to pour Arabic coffee in the traditional manner. The delicate brass pot felt awkward, and she could feel judgment in every pair of eyes watching. Perhaps, a quiet voice interrupted, we could also discuss how Western efficiency might enhance our traditions without diminishing them. Amira had entered silently, her infant daughter cradled against her chest. She settled gracefully beside Abigail, adjusting her designer abaya with one hand while balancing the baby with the other, a picture of modern Arab womanhood. Sister, Karima began diplomatically, there are centuries of wisdom in our ways. Yes, Amira agreed, and centuries of wisdom in being able to adapt. Did not our ancestors trade with cultures across the world, incorporating what was valuable while maintaining their core beliefs? The tension in the room shifted as other women nodded thoughtfully. Abigail felt a surge of gratitude for her future sister-in-law's intervention. Later that evening, she found Abdul in his study, surrounded by hospital documents, but distracted by a small wooden box on his desk. Another puzzle box, she asked, recognizing the intricate craftsmanship, a gift from the village artisan who made Tommy's box. Abdul's eyes crinkled with affection. He said it represents our journey, each layer revealing something new, each solution leading to another challenge. Abigail settled into what had become her chair, tucked into the corner of his massive desk. Speaking of challenges, your aunt thinks I need at least 6 months of cultural training before I'm fit to be seen in public as your wife. Abdul set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. And what do you think? I think, she chose her words carefully, that there's value in both preserving tradition and embracing change, like what we're doing at the hospital, finding ways to honor ancient wisdom while implementing modern solutions. His expression softened with pride. Tell me more. Well, take the pediatric wing. We've incorporated traditional healing gardens and prayer rooms, but we've also installed the most advanced medical technology available. The children receive both modern treatments and traditional remedies, validated by our research team. It's not about choosing one way over another, it's about finding the best of both. Abdul rose, moving to stand behind her chair. His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs working out the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Apply that wisdom to our situation. Abigail leaned back into his touch. I want to learn your traditions, to understand and respect them. But I also want to show that being Western doesn't mean being disrespectful. That change doesn't have to mean loss. Like your garden, he murmured, desert roses growing alongside Wyoming wildflowers. Exactly, and speaking of Wyoming, she turned to face him, my mother's coming next week. Abdul's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their gentle massage. Ah, our cultural bridge building goes both ways, I see. Sarah had warned Abigail about her mother's reaction. She spent an hour Googling modern Arab marriages, and now she's convinced you're going to disappear behind a veil forever. The reality of Margaret Cora's arrival was both better and worse than expected. She emerged from first class, Abdul's insistence, looking shell-shocked by Dubai's opulence, clutching her worn leather purse like a shield. Good Lord, were her first words, taking in the private terminal and waiting Rolls-Royce. Abigail Jean Cora, what have you gotten yourself into? But over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Margaret watched her daughter move confidently through her new world, directing hospital staff, discussing medical protocols in mixed Arabic and English, seamlessly blending professionalism with cultural awareness. She saw how the hospital staff respected Abigail, not just as their Sheikh's fiancée, but as a skilled administrator in her own right. Most importantly, she saw Abdul with Abigail, saw how his eyes followed her with pride and devotion, how he valued her opinions in meetings, how he supported her innovations while helping her navigate cultural complexities. The turning point came during a private family dinner. Margaret, still struggling with chopsticks at a high-end Asian fusion restaurant, mentioned offhandedly, "You know, I was worried you'd lose yourself here, honey, but instead, you found yourself." Abigail blinked back tears as Abdul squeezed her hand under the table. Later that night, she found him on their balcony, watching the city lights compete with desert stars. "Your mother," he said thoughtfully, "reminds me of my Aunt Karima." "Should I be worried?" He laughed, pulling her close. "Both want to protect their own. Both fear change, but both, I think, are beginning to see that love can build stronger bridges than fear can build walls." As if to prove his point, they discovered Margaret and Karima in the garden the next morning, bent over a shared tablet computer. Karima was teaching Margaret to use a translation app, while Margaret was showing Karima pictures of Wyoming wildflowers that might thrive in desert soil. The hospital's pediatric wing became another unexpected bridge. Margaret, a retired kindergarten teacher, spent hours with the young patients, teaching them English nursery rhymes while learning Arabic ones in return. She worked with the child life specialists to develop programs that incorporated both Western and Eastern approaches to helping children cope with hospitalization. "You see," Abigail said to Abdul, watching her mother teach a giggling group of nurses to make paper snowflakes, "cultural integration goes both ways." Their wedding plans evolved the same way, a celebration that would honor both their traditions while creating something uniquely their own. When Abigail suggested incorporating Wyoming wildflowers into the traditional Arab wedding rituals, Karima surprisingly approved. "But," the older woman insisted, "you must learn the proper way to wear a wedding abaya. Some traditions cannot be changed." "Some shouldn't be," Abigail agreed, earning a rare smile from her future aunt. One evening, about a month after Margaret's return to Wyoming, Abigail found Abdul working late in his study again. The puzzle box sat solved on his desk, a feat that had taken their combined efforts over several late-night sessions. "I've been thinking," she said, settling into her corner of his desk. "Maybe we're not really building bridges between cultures." He looked up, curious. "No. Maybe we're creating something new entirely. Not Western, not Eastern, but a third way that takes the best of both." Abdul's smile was brilliant. "Like our hospital? Like everything we do." She reached for his hand. "The traditional and the modern, the ancient and the new, they're not opposites to be reconciled. They're ingredients to be combined into something stronger than either could be alone." He raised their joined hands to his lips. "Mashallah, Habibti. Now you sound like a desert philosopher." "I had a good teacher." She glanced at the solved puzzle box. "Several good teachers, actually." Outside, the call to evening prayer mixed with the sounds of contemporary Dubai traffic. On their shared desk, hospital documents in English and Arabic sat beside wedding plans that included both Wyoming wildflowers and traditional Arab poetry. And in their garden, desert roses and prairie blooms continued their unlikely but beautiful coexistence, proving that love, like life itself, knows no cultural bounds. The challenges weren't over. They knew that. There would always be those who questioned their choices, who saw their union as too modern or too traditional, too Western or too Eastern. But as they stood together on their balcony that evening, watching their city sparkle beneath an ancient desert sky, they understood that their strength lay not in erasing their differences, but in celebrating them. Two hearts, one path, Abdul murmured in Arabic, his fingers tracing the inscription on her ring. One path, Abigail repeated in carefully practiced Arabic, but with room for both our footprints. And in that moment, under stars that had witnessed countless stories of love transcending boundaries, they knew they were writing a new chapter, not just in their own lives, but in the ongoing story of how hearts build bridges that cultures alone cannot. Chapter 9. A New Hope. The second surrogacy attempt succeeded on a morning when Dubai's infamous heat finally showed signs of relenting. Abigail sat in Dr. Rashid's office, her hand clasped tightly in Abdul's as they watched the ultrasound monitor flicker to life. The grainy image appeared, and with it, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that brought tears to both their eyes. "Alhamdulillah," Abdul whispered, his usual composure cracking as he pressed his lips to Abigail's knuckles. "Allah is merciful." Their surrogate, Nadia, beamed from the examination table. She had been carefully chosen, a distant cousin of Abdul's family, who understood both the medical and cultural significance of her role. Her own 3 children made her an experienced mother, while her husband's position as a respected imam had silenced any potential cultural objections. "The fetus is developing perfectly," Dr. Rashid confirmed, her professional tone barely masking her own joy. She had been with them through the first failed attempt, had witnessed their growth from careful partners to devoted lovers. All indicators are exactly where they should be. The news spread through the family like a joyous sandstorm. Within hours, the palace was buzzing with celebration preparations. Abigail found herself swept into traditional ceremonies she hadn't even known existed, each one marking another milestone in their journey to parenthood. "In our culture," Amira explained as she helped Abigail dress for the first blessing ceremony, "a child is celebrated from the moment we know of its existence. Each month brings new rituals, new prayers, new hopes." The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Under a canopy of twinkling lights in the palace garden, women from both families gathered to sing traditional songs and offer blessings. Even Aunt Karima, who had initially been the most skeptical of their unconventional arrangement, led prayers with tears in her eyes. "You see," Abdul murmured later that night, finding Abigail on their balcony. She wore the ceremonial dress his mother had given her, its intricate embroidery catching starlight. "Our child will be born into so much love." "Our child," Abigail repeated softly, letting the words sink in. Though she wasn't carrying the baby herself, her role as mother was unquestioned. The family had embraced the modern arrangement with surprising enthusiasm, perhaps because they'd seen how completely she and Abdul had embraced each other's cultures. The next few months brought a whirlwind of activity. While Nadia experienced a textbook pregnancy, Abigail threw herself into preparations. She and Abdul worked with architects to design the perfect nursery, a room that would blend the best of both their worlds. "The ceiling," Abdul suggested one evening as they reviewed plans, "should have constellations from both Wyoming and Arabian skies." Abigail looked up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by design samples. "That's perfect. The stars that guided both our paths." The hospital provided another outlet for their excitement. They created a new prenatal program that combined Western medical practices with traditional Arabian birthing wisdom. Nadia became their first participant, helping them refine protocols that would serve families from all backgrounds. "See how the traditional herbs complement modern vitamins," Abigail explained to a group of visiting doctors. "We're not choosing between approaches. We're finding ways to enhance both." Abdul, watching from the doorway, felt his heart swell with pride. His fiancée had become more than just a bridge between cultures. She was helping create an entirely new approach to healthcare that honored both tradition and innovation. The pregnancy's 4th month brought a new ceremony, this one led by Abdul's grandmother. The elderly matriarch, who rarely left her private quarters, insisted on blessing Abigail herself. "Come here, Binti," she beckoned, using the Arabic word for my daughter. Her gnarled hands settled on Abigail's head as she recited prayers passed down through generations. Then, switching to carefully practiced English, she added, "You bring new light to old ways. This is good." That night, unable to sleep, Abigail found Abdul in his study. He'd been writing again, poetry that attempted to capture their journey. "Listen to this," he said, drawing her onto his lap. His voice took on that musical quality she loved as he read in Arabic, then translated, "In the desert's heart, where ancient stars meet modern dreams, a new life stirs. Not born of one world or another, but of both and therefore richer. Like rain blessing parched earth, love transforms all it touches." Abigail wiped away tears as he finished. "That's beautiful. Will you teach our child poetry?" "Along with science and medicine and all the other gifts you'll share," he promised, "our child will know the best of both worlds." The 5th month brought the first butterfly kicks, reported by an excited Nadia during their daily check-in. Abigail had insisted on being involved in every aspect of the pregnancy, attending each appointment, helping Nadia balance traditional practices with modern prenatal care. "The baby responds to your voice," Nadia told them during one visit, "especially when you read together." This led to evening sessions where they would sit with Nadia, taking turns reading in English and Arabic. Abdul chose poetry and ancient stories, while Abigail shared medical journals and children's books. The baby seemed to enjoy both equally, moving energetically during their readings. A literary critic already, Abdul joked as they felt a particularly enthusiastic kick during one of his poems. The 6th month brought another milestone. Their wedding preparations began in earnest. They had decided to marry before the baby's birth, combining traditional Arab ceremonies with Western elements that honored both their heritages. "The baby is a gift from Allah," Abdul's mother declared, overseeing wedding plans with joyful determination. "But your love, that is a miracle all its own." One evening, as they walked through the hospital's healing garden, Abdul surprised Abigail with a special gift. It was another puzzle box, but this one was different, crafted by artisans from both Wyoming and Dubai, featuring intricate patterns that blended Western and Eastern designs. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, she found a delicate golden charm bracelet. Each charm represented a milestone in their journey: a tiny hospital building, a desert rose, a Wyoming wildflower, and now a perfect pearl representing their growing child. "For the story we're writing together," Abdul explained, fastening it around her wrist. "Each charm a chapter, each chapter a blessing." The 7th month brought a flurry of activity as they finalized both wedding and nursery preparations. The nursery walls now featured hand-painted murals depicting scenes from both their cultures, Arabian Nights merging seamlessly with Wyoming landscapes. Traditional Arabic lullabies played alongside Western classical music, creating a symphony of cultural harmony. During a quiet moment between preparations, Abigail found Abdul in the nursery, standing beneath the constellation ceiling they'd created together. "What are you thinking?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "About how far we've come," he replied, turning to hold her. "From that first meeting in Wyoming to here, Allah's plans are truly greater than our own." They stood together, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their blended lives, prayer beads hanging beside modern baby monitors, traditional swaddling cloths folded next to organic onesies, both cultures represented in perfect balance. Our child will never have to choose, Abigail realized aloud. They'll inherit the richness of both worlds. And create something new from them, Abdul agreed, just as we have. The news that Nadia was carrying a girl came during a routine scan in the 8th month. The joy that filled the hospital room was overwhelming. Both families had gathered for the appointment, turning it into an impromptu celebration. A daughter, Abdul breathed, his eyes shining, to be raised with both the strength of your independence and the wisdom of our traditions. That evening, during another blessing ceremony, Abdul's grandmother made an announcement that brought tears to every eye. "The child shall be named Noor," she declared in Arabic, then repeated in English for Abigail's family. "It means light in our language. For she is the light born of two worlds, the dawn of a new understanding between East and West." As the women celebrated around them, Abdul pulled Abigail close. "Perfect," he whispered. "Like the desert rose that blooms after rain, our Noor will bring beauty from the joining of different worlds." Standing there, surrounded by the love of two families that had become one, Abigail felt the future unfold before them like a tapestry woven with threads of gold and silver, tradition and progress, East and West, ancient wisdom and modern dreams, all creating a pattern more beautiful than either could have designed alone. The baby moved within Nadia, as if adding her own blessing to the moment. Above them, stars from both their skies twinkled in the desert night, bearing witness to a love story that had transcended arrangements to become something rare and precious, like a desert rose blooming under impossible stars. Chapter 10. Trials and Truth. The complications began without warning on a sweltering Dubai afternoon. Abigail was reviewing patient files in her hospital office when Nadia's husband called, his usually steady voice trembling with concern. Their surrogate had collapsed during her morning prayers. The next hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and anxious waiting. Abigail found herself in the unusual position of being both medical professional and family member, her training warring with her emotions as she watched the monitoring equipment surrounding Nadia's bed. "Preeclampsia," Dr. Rashid confirmed grimly. "The blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to consider early delivery if it doesn't stabilize within 24 hours. Abdul stood by the window, his formal Sheikh's attire incongruous in the sterile hospital room. He'd been in the middle of a crucial investment meeting when Abigail's text arrived, but had left without explanation, his priorities crystal clear. "She's only at 32 weeks, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of both medical knowledge and personal fear. "The risks are significant," Dr. Rashid finished, "but less dangerous than waiting if the preeclampsia worsens." Nadia stirred on the bed, her face peaceful despite the crisis surrounding her. "Allah's will," she murmured, reaching for both their hands. "The baby is strong. I feel it." The next day brought a parade of specialists, each offering different opinions on the best course of action. Traditional healers consulted with modern doctors, while both families maintained a constant vigil of prayer and support. Abigail found herself translating not just between languages, but between medical philosophies. "The traditional herbs might help," she suggested during one tense consultation, "if we can verify they won't interact with the Western medications." Abdul watched her navigate these complexities with pride, despite his worry. She had grown so natural in bridging their worlds, finding ways to honor both without compromising either. On the third day, as dawn painted the desert sky in shades of rose and gold, Nadia's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously, and protein levels in her urine indicated advancing kidney stress. "We can't wait any longer," Dr. Rashid announced. "We need to perform an emergency C-section." The hospital burst into controlled chaos as preparations began. Abigail found herself torn between professional instincts and personal terror. She knew the statistics for babies born at 32 weeks, good, but not without risks. She knew the advanced capabilities of their NICU, which she had helped design. But knowledge provided cold comfort when it was your own child's life hanging in the balance. Abdul found her in the hospital's prayer room, her head bowed not in traditional prayer, but in desperate hope. Without a word, he sank to his knees beside her on the prayer mat. "In times like these," he said softly, "we are reminded that some things are beyond our control. Modern medicine, traditional wisdom, they can only take us so far. The rest—" He reached for her hand. "The rest we must trust to something greater than ourselves." Abigail leaned into his strength, letting tears fall freely. "I'm scared, Abdul. All my medical training, all our preparations make us better prepared than most," he finished. "But they don't make us less human, less vulnerable to fear and hope." He brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what my grandmother said when she blessed the nursery? That love is the strongest medicine. And we have that in abundance, Habibti, from both our families, from our staff, from each other." He helped her to her feet. "Now let's go welcome our daughter." The operating room was a study in cultural integration, state-of-the-art equipment alongside traditional healing crystals, Western surgical teams working in harmony with Eastern energy practitioners. Dr. Rashid had embraced their hospital's innovative approach, understanding that comfort and belief could be as powerful as medicine in times of crisis. Nadia's husband, the respected imam, stood outside the OR reading Quranic verses that echoed softly through the speakers, a modern concession to traditional practices. Abigail's mother, who had flown in immediately upon hearing the news, joined him in her own prayers, their different faiths united in common purpose. The surgery itself was swift and precise. At 3:17 p.m., under the warmth of a desert sun that had witnessed countless miracles, tiny Noor Ati announced her arrival with a cry that seemed impossibly strong for her size. "Mashallah," Abdul breathed, his composure finally breaking as he watched the NICU team assess his daughter. "She has your fighting spirit." The next weeks tested them in ways neither had imagined. Noor's journey in the NICU became a testament to everything they believed about integrating medical approaches. Traditional massage techniques proved as valuable as modern incubators. Ancient breathing practices worked alongside oxygen therapy. Prayer and medicine, East and West, old and new, all focused on helping their tiny warrior grow stronger. Abigail practically lived in the NICU, her role as hospital administrator temporarily delegated to focus on more important matters. She learned to perform kangaroo care while participating in conference calls, to read medical charts while reciting Arabic prayers, to be both medical professional and anxious mother. Abdul's transformation was equally profound. The powerful Sheikh who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar investments could be found at odd hours singing soft lullabies to his daughter, telling her stories in mixed Arabic and English, promising her the moon and stars and everything in between. "Watch," Fatima whispered to Amira one evening, nodding toward where Abdul sat beside the incubator, reading poetry to Noor while Abigail dozed nearby. "He's not even wearing his formal robes. No one else has ever seen him so human." The hospital staff witnessed another side of their administrators during this time. They saw the couple's unwavering support of each other, their seamless integration of cultural practices, their willingness to try any combination of treatments that might help their daughter thrive. "They're living what they've been teaching us," one nurse observed. "That healing comes in many forms, and love speaks all languages." Noor's progress was steady, but painfully slow. Each milestone, breathing without assistance, maintaining her temperature, taking her first drops of milk, was celebrated by an ever-growing extended family. Hospital staff found excuses to visit the NICU, bringing both medical support and personal encouragement. One particularly difficult night, when Noor's oxygen levels had dipped dangerously low, Abigail found unexpected comfort from Aunt Karima. The traditionalist matriarch arrived wearing her finest abaya, carrying ancient remedies and modern medical journals. "Your dedication to our ways has earned you the right to blend them with yours," she declared, helping prepare a traditional compress while monitoring the oxygen readouts. "The child is blessed to have both." Days turned to weeks, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. Abdul and Abigail took turns reading medical updates and religious texts, their voices mixing in a harmony that seemed to strengthen their daughter. The NICU became a sacred space where medicine and miracle danced together, where science and faith found common ground. Finally, after 43 days that felt like both moments and eternities, Dr. Rashid declared Noor strong enough to go home. The ceremony that followed blended traditional blessing rituals with modern medical discharge procedures, creating yet another new tradition in their ever-evolving story. As they settled Noor into her carefully prepared nursery, beneath the constellation ceiling that mapped both their skies, Abdul pulled Abigail close. "Look what we've created," he whispered, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in her crib. "Not just Noor, but everything. This home that honors both our cultures, this hospital that heals in multiple ways, this love that proves Allah's greatest gifts often come disguised as challenges." Abigail touched the charm bracelet he'd given her, now bearing a new charm that represented their NICU journey. "We still have so much to figure out," she said softly. "How to raise her with the best of both worlds, how to help her navigate the complexities of her heritage." "Together," Abdul finished, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always together." Outside, the Dubai night sparkled with its peculiar magic, ancient stars witnessing modern miracles. In her crib, Noor slept surrounded by tokens of both her cultures, a traditional evil eye amulet hanging beside a Wyoming dream catcher, her name written in both Arabic calligraphy and Western script, lullabies from two worlds playing softly in perfect harmony. The desert wind carried the evening call to prayer, mixing with the soft beep of the modern baby monitor. And in that moment, watching their miracle child sleep while the world's oldest and newest songs mingled in the air, Abdul and Abigail understood that they had created something unprecedented, a love story that transcended arrangement, a family that bridged worlds, and a future that promised to be as limitless as the desert sky above them. Chapter 11. Love's Revelation. The desert night stretched endless and diamond bright above them as Abdul's private helicopter cut through the darkness. Noor, now 3 months old and thriving, slept peacefully in Abigail's arms, unfazed by the rhythm of the rotors. Their destination was a mystery to her. Abdul had simply appeared at the end of her hospital rounds, eyes twinkling, with secrets. "Trust me," he'd said, helping her into the aircraft. "There's something I need to show you." Looking at him now, silhouetted against the cockpit lights, Abigail marveled at how much had changed. The formal Sheikh who had first proposed their arrangement had evolved into something far more complex, still commanding and respected in the business world, but also a father who spent hours making silly faces at their daughter, a partner who left poetry hidden in her medical journals. The helicopter began its descent, and Abigail gasped as she recognized their location. The remote village where Abdul had first proposed, where their love had first been acknowledged under desert stars. But something was different. Lights twinkled across the dunes, creating patterns she didn't remember. "Welcome to Al Hayat's new medical center," Abdul said proudly as they touched down. "Your designs, implemented while you were focused on Noor's NICU stay. I wanted to surprise you." The village had transformed. The small clinic, she remembered, had expanded into a proper medical facility, but one that maintained perfect harmony with its desert surroundings. Traditional architecture housed modern equipment, while healing gardens bloomed improbably in the desert night. This is... Abigail struggled for words as they walked through the facility, Noor still sleeping contentedly against her chest. Your vision, Abdul finished. The perfect integration of Western medicine and Eastern wisdom, just as you designed. The staff has been implementing your protocols for months. They toured the facility, where every detail reflected their shared philosophy. Prayer rooms adjacent to operating theaters, traditional healers consulting with Western-trained doctors, even a small NICU modeled after the one that had saved their daughter's life. But this isn't why I brought you here tonight, Abdul said softly as they finished the tour. He led them to a familiar dune where a Bedouin tent had been erected. Inside, cushions and carpets created an intimate space lit by traditional lanterns. Do you remember this spot? He asked, helping her settle with Noor. Of course, this is where you first told me you loved me. Abdul smiled, reaching into his robes to withdraw a familiar object, the puzzle box he'd given her so long ago in Wyoming. Open it, he encouraged. The box clicked open easily now, muscle memory making the complex sequence simple. Inside lay a collection of paper scrolls, each tied with golden thread. What are these? Every poem I've written since meeting you, Abdul explained, his voice soft with emotion. I've been saving them for this moment. He took the first scroll, unrolling it carefully. The paper was high-quality parchment, his elegant Arabic script flowing across it like water. This one, he said, I wrote the night you first arrived in Dubai. As he read, his voice took on that musical quality that still made her heart skip. She comes like dawn to desert darkness, bringing light to shadows I didn't know I lived in. Allah's greatest gifts often arrive disguised as simple business arrangements. One by one, he shared the poems, each marking a milestone in their journey. The night they first worked late in his study, the morning she'd mastered her first Arabic medical terms, the day they'd learned of Noor's impending arrival, the long nights in the NICU when faith and medicine danced together. And this, he said finally, reaching for the last scroll, I wrote tonight. But before he could read it, a small sound interrupted. Noor, stirring against Abigail's chest. They both watched, enchanted, as their daughter blinked awake, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with the curious gaze that reminded them so much of Abigail's analytical mind. Perfect timing, little one, Abdul smiled, shifting closer to cradle them both. You should hear this too. He began to read, translating as he went. In the space between stars where worlds collide, where ancient wisdom meets modern dreams, I found a love that defies definition. Not Western, not Eastern, but something new, like desert roses blooming after rain, like hospital halls where prayers meet medicine, like our daughter's eyes that hold both our worlds. This love transforms everything it touches. Allah's greatest miracle isn't in the joining of hearts, but in how love makes us more than we were, more than we dreamed we could be. In your strength, I found gentleness. In your questions, I found new answers. In our differences, we found completion. The Bedouin knows the desert's greatest treasures lie not in its oases, but in the journey between them. So too our love's richness lives not in grand moments, but in small revelations. Your smile when Noor grips your finger, your voice mixing Arabic and English in lullabies, your heart that builds bridges between worlds. Tonight, under the same stars that witnessed our beginning, I offer not poetry but truth. Every arrangement is Allah's arrow, pointing to destinations we cannot see. Ours pointed here, to this perfect moment, where business became blessing, where partnership became poetry, where two worlds became one heart, beating in three bodies. The last words hung in the desert air, weighted with emotion. Noor reached up, tiny fingers grasping at the tears on Abigail's cheeks. "There's more," Abdul said softly. "Look deeper, in the box." At the bottom, she found a simple gold chain bearing two intertwined symbols, a traditional Arabic calligraphy design and a medical caduceus, crafted to flow together as one. "For the hospital administrator who became my heart's administrator," Abdul explained, fastening it around her neck. "For the woman who proves daily that love needs no translation." "It's beautiful," Abigail whispered, touching the pendant. "Like everything about this night. But why now? Why here?" Abdul gathered them both closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Because tomorrow, when we finally formalize our marriage in front of both our families, I wanted you to know something crucial. This isn't about arrangements anymore. Hasn't been for a long time." He touched Noor's cheek gently as she drifted back to sleep. "This journey we're on, raising our daughter, running the hospitals, building bridges between cultures, it's bigger than any business partnership. What we've created, it's changing lives across 2 continents, but more importantly, it's changed us." Abigail leaned into him, feeling the steady strength that had become her home. "I never imagined," she said softly, "that accepting a sheikh's unusual proposal would lead to this." "Allah's plans are greater than our own," Abdul smiled. "I thought I was seeking a partner to help build hospitals and raise a child. Instead, I found the other half of my soul." Outside their tent, the desert night continued its ancient dance of wind and stars. In the village below, their medical center stood as testament to what love could build when hearts worked together. And nestled between them, Noor slept peacefully, her very existence proving that the most precious blooms can grow in unexpected places. Abdul reached for one more scroll, this one sealed with gold. "For tomorrow," he explained. "My wedding vows, written in both our languages, promising both our traditions." "Should I be worried?" Abigail teased gently. "Only about the tears you'll shed when you hear how many ways I've found to say I love you in every language we share." They stayed in the tent until dawn, painted the desert gold, sharing stories and dreams, plans and poems. Their conversation flowed naturally between English and Arabic now, cultural references mixing as easily as their hearts had merged. When the sun finally rose, painting the medical center in shades of promise, they stood together on their special dune. Noor stirred, reaching toward the light with a smile that held both their features. "Ready to become officially what we've been in our hearts for so long?" Abdul asked softly. Abigail looked at their daughter, at the hospital below, at the man who had transformed her life in ways no arrangement could have predicted. "Ready," she answered in Arabic, then smiled. "Or as they say in Wyoming, let's do this thing." Abdul's laugh joined the desert wind, carrying their joy across the dunes like a blessing. Tomorrow would bring ceremonies and celebrations, families and futures merging in ways both traditional and new. But this moment, just the 3 of them under a desert dawn, this was their real ceremony, their private acknowledgement of how love transforms everything it touches, like the pendant at her throat, like the hospital below, like their own hearts, 2 distinct elements flowing together to create something stronger, more beautiful and more meaningful than either could be alone. A dream fulfilled. The wedding dawned on a day when Dubai seemed to exist between worlds. A rare morning mist softened the city's modern edges, while the rising sun painted ancient desert sands in shades of rose and gold. In Abigail's preparation chamber, women from both families worked in harmony, her mother carefully arranging the white wedding dress, while Aunt Karima draped the traditional bridal abaya with loving precision. "Something old," Margaret Cora whispered, fastening her grandmother's pearl earrings to Abigail's ears. "Something new," Amira added, presenting a diamond-studded headpiece that would complement both Western veil and Eastern hijab. "Something borrowed," Fatima smiled, wrapping a centuries-old pearl-encrusted belt around the wedding dress, a family heirloom usually reserved for blood relatives. "Something blue," Abdul's grandmother finished in careful English, pressing an ancient sapphire ring into Abigail's palm. "From my mother's mother, now to you, my heart's daughter." Tears threatened to ruin the careful makeup as Abigail looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was neither fully Western nor Eastern, but something uniquely beautiful. A bridge between worlds, just like the love that had brought her here. In another chamber, Abdul prepared with equal care. His traditional dress incorporated subtle Western elements, cufflinks made from Wyoming jade, a watch that had belonged to Abigail's father. As he dressed, his brothers and male relatives shared wisdom passed down through generations, while Noor's happy gurgles provided a soundtrack to the ancient rituals. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of cultural integration, held in the hospital's healing garden where their journey had truly begun. Traditional Arabic architecture framed the space, while Wyoming wildflowers bloomed improbably among desert roses. Their guests represented a perfect blend: hospital staff in both Western suits and traditional dress, family members from both continents, even some of their former patients, including a fully recovered Tommy, flown in specially from Wyoming. They had written their vows in both languages, their promises flowing seamlessly between English and Arabic. Abdul began, "Beloved, I stand before you not as a sheikh, not as a businessman, but as a man transformed by love. What began as an arrangement has bloomed like desert roses after rain into something more precious than all the world's wealth. You've taught me that true partnership means growing together, that love knows no boundaries, and that the heart's wisdom surpasses all careful plans." Abigail's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "My love, I came to Dubai thinking I would help build hospitals, but instead I found myself being rebuilt. You've shown me that strength can be gentle, that tradition can dance with progress, and that love's greatest miracle is how it makes us more than we ever dreamed we could be. In you, I found not just a partner, but a completion I never knew I was missing." They exchanged rings inscribed with words in both languages: "Two hearts, one path," in English circling into Rohan Tariqa Wahid in Arabic script. As they did so, Noor, held by a mirror, let out a delighted laugh that echoed through the garden like a blessing. The celebration that followed was as unique as their love story. Traditional Arabic music wove seamlessly with Western melodies. The feast featured both Arabian delicacies and American comfort food. Guests moved between traditional segregated celebrations and mixed gatherings with practiced ease, respecting both cultures while creating something new. But the most touching moment came during the traditional first dance. As Abdul led Abigail onto the floor, the music began, a specially composed piece that blended Western orchestra with Arabian instruments. Then, to everyone's surprise, Abdul began to sing. His voice, rich and emotional, carried words he had written himself. "In the space between worlds where love blooms, where desert meets prairie under ancient stars, Allah's greatest gift was not the plan I made, but the heart I found when all plans fell away. Like healing gardens where old meets new, like our daughter's eyes holding both our skies, this love builds bridges across every divide, creating something more precious than either alone. Habibti, my heart's administrator, partner in healing, mother of our joy, you've taught me that love's true miracle is not in what it joins, but what it creates." As the song ended, their guests wiped away tears, touched by the raw emotion in his voice. But Abdul wasn't finished. He guided Abigail to the garden center where a special display had been prepared. "Look," he whispered, pressing a button. The garden's modern lighting system dimmed, revealing an intricate constellation effect overhead. Stars from both Wyoming and Arabian skies merged into one breathtaking canvas. Against this backdrop, photographs began to play, their first meeting in Wyoming, the hospital's construction, quiet moments in his study, Noor's birth, all their journey's precious milestones. "Our story," Abdul said softly, holding her close, "written in the stars and in our hearts." Their families gathered around them. Noor passed carefully into their arms. Standing there, their daughter between them, their joined families surrounding them, their shared hospital rising behind them against the Dubai skyline, they understood that their love story was more than just two people finding each other. It was East meeting West, not in clash, but in harmony. It was tradition dancing with progress to create new possibilities. It was proof that love, when given room to grow, could build bridges strong enough to carry not just two hearts, but two cultures, two worldviews, two ways of life into something richer than either could be alone. As the evening drew to a close, they found a quiet moment in their special garden. Noor slept peacefully between them, one tiny hand clutching Abdul's finger while the other held Abigail's pendant. "Happy?" Abdul asked softly in Arabic. "Beyond words," Abigail replied in the same language, then smiled. "In any language." Above them, stars from both their skies twinkled as one. Below, their hospital continued its healing work, blending the best of both worlds. And in their hearts, love that had begun as a business arrangement had bloomed into something so profound it touched not just their lives, but countless others. A legacy of healing, hope, and the endless possibilities that arise when hearts dare to build bridges across every divide. Their story, like the desert roses that bloomed against all odds, proved that love's greatest power lies not in erasing differences, but in transforming them into sources of strength and beauty. In their daughter's peaceful face, in their hospital's groundbreaking work, in their family's joyful unity, they saw the future they had built together, a future where "two hearts, one path" was not just a phrase inscribed on rings, but a truth lived every day in 1,000 beautiful ways. And so, what began in a Wyoming children's hospital with a sheikh's unusual proposal had grown into something far more magnificent, a love story that would be told in two languages, celebrated in two cultures, and cherished in countless hearts for generations to come. For in the end, their journey proved that true love, like the most precious desert blooms, knows no boundaries. It simply grows where it's meant to, transforming everything it touches into something more beautiful than anyone could have planned or imagined. As the Dubai night wrapped them in its velvet embrace, Abdul whispered the words that had become their truth. "Two hearts. One path," Abigail finished, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, their future stretching out before them, as endless and beautiful as the desert stars above. The end. Don't forget to subscribe,